Hello, welcome back. Point Cook in Victoria is where you will find the oldest continually operating military airfield in the world. Today it is part of RAAF base Williams, named in honour of Air Marshal Sir Richard Williams, the father of the RAAF. You've heard of the term failure is an orphan and success as many fathers. Well, there are two other contenders for the title of Fathers of the RAAF, and one of them wasn't even Australian. Their names: Australian Eric Harrison and Englishman Henry Petre. Eric Harrison was born in Victoria in 1886. He was a flying instructor in Britain in 1912 when he answered the Australian Defence Department's call for pilots to form an aviation school. Petre was born in England in 1884 and qualified as a solicitor in 1905. Impressed by Louis Blériot's pioneering cross-channel flight in July 1909, Petre gave up his legal practice, borrowed £250 and proceeded to build his own aeroplane with design assistance from his brother Edward. After spending 6 months on its construction, Petre crashed the machine on its maiden flight. Uninjured and undiscouraged, he borrowed a further £25 and sensibly took flying lessons at Brooklands Airfield in Surrey. He obtained his Royal Aero Club Aviator Certificate number 128 on the 12th of September 1911. He became an instructor at Brooklands De Perduysen School and later its head prior to taking up employment as a designer and pilot with Handley Page Limited. In December 1911, the Australian Defence Department had advertised in the United Kingdom for two competent mechanists, or mechanics if you wish, and aviators to establish a flying corps and school. From among 50 applications, Petre was chosen and commissioned as a lieutenant in the Australian Military Forces. His appointment was on the 6th of August 1912, making him this nation's first military pilot. Petre arrived in Australia in January 1913, his first task being to choose a site for the proposed Central Flying School, which he was to command. The other appointee, Eric Harrison, joined him later that year. Together they were tasked to establish Australia's first airbase and its inaugural training unit, the Central Flying School. Petre motorcycled to sites to choose land for a flying school, rejecting the government's preferred location near the Royal Military College in Duntroon in Canberra, instead selecting 297 hectares at Point Cook in Victoria. Unlike hilly Duntroon, Point Cook was flat, close to the coast and not, in Petre's own words, isolated in the bush. He and Harrison established the CFS over the following year with 4 mechanics, 3 other staff and 5 aircraft, including 2 De Perduysen monoplanes, 2 Royal Aircraft Factory BE-2 truck biplanes and a Bristol box kite for initial training. Harrison made the unit's first flight in the box kite on Sunday, the 1st of March 1914, and this was Australia's first military flight. 8 days later, Petre registered Australia's first military flying accident when he crashed a De Perduysen while trying to avoid telephone wires during landing. He escaped with bruising, but wrecked the plane. The first flying course started the 17th of August 1914, 2 weeks after the outbreak of World War II. Students included Captain Thomas White and Lieutenants Richard Williams, George Mertz and David Manuel. Harrison was responsible for initial training and Petre for advanced instruction. On the 8th of February 1915, the Australian government received a request from the British government of India for aerial assistance in the campaign against the Turks in Mesopotamia. Petre was appointed the Mesopotamia Half-Flight's commanding officer and embarked for Basra via Bombay on the 14th of April, later to be joined by fellow pilots White, Mertz, Lieutenant William Trelaw as well, along with 37 ground staff. This was the first unit of the newly formed Australian Flying Corps to see active service. He led the half-flight through the battles of Essin and Setisson and the siege of Kut. His actions in the Middle East earned him the Distinguished Flying Service Order, the Military Cross, and 4 mentions in dispatches. In Mesopotamia, Petre was required to lead the Australian Flying Corps contingents in reconnaissance and sabotage missions, and had to deal with unreliable machines, hazardous terrain, and the threat of incarceration or death at the hands of hostile tribesmen. The obsolete aircraft supplied by the Indian government were the 2 Morris Farman Shorthorns and the Morris Farman Longhorn. And they were only capable of top speeds of 80 kilometres per hour, while the desert wind known as the Shamel could reach 130 kilometres an hour, meaning that the aircraft often made no headway or were simply blown backwards. In July they received 2 Caudron aircraft, a marginal improvement on the Farmans. On the 24th of August 1915, 4 Martinsides were added. They were now redesignated Number 30 Squadron Royal Flying Corps. The squadron moved into Kut following the cities captured by the Allies during the Battle of Essin in September. Over the following 2 months, both Treloar and White were recaptured and became prisoners of war, leaving Petre as the only pilot remaining from the original half-flight. During the siege of Kut between December 1915 and April 1916, he flew a series of missions using crude parachutes to airdrop grain supplies, medical supplies and equipment to the town's entrapped garrison, which included 9 of his AFC mechanics. Petre was awarded the Military Cross on the 14th of January 1916 and mentioned in dispatches twice more over the course of the year. In May 1916 he contracted typhoid and was sent to India for recuperation. He transferred out of Number 30 Squadron in December and was awarded the Distinguished Service Order the same month. In February 1917 he was posted to France with Number 15 Squadron RFC, a reconnaissance unit operating BE-2s. Petre subsequently returned to England and took charge of Number 5 Squadron AFC, also known as Number 29 Squadron Royal Flying Corps, a training unit for Australian fighter pilots, particularly those destined for Palestine. He had hoped to command Number 1 Squadron Australian Flying Corps in Palestine, but received an adverse report concerning his leadership abilities, and the position went to Williams. Petre was discharged from the AFC as a major on the 31st of January 1918 to take a commission with the Royal Air Force as a major in 1918, commanding Number 75 Home Defence Squadron, before retiring from the military in 1919. He resumed practice as a solicitor in London. He married Kathleen de Vries, a Canadian, in 1929. Petre introduced Kathleen to racing cars, and as Kay Petre, she became one of Britain's leading female drivers in the 1930s. It is tempting to think that pioneer Australian racing car driver and aviator Colin de Vries was related to her, but that'd be a long shot. Henry Petre maintained his interest in aviation for the rest of his life, taking up competitive gliding and, according to historian Alan Stevens, more than 30 years after his first flight in 1911, still enjoying taking an Oster for a spin. Petre broke the British gliding duration record in 1931 with a time of almost 3.5 hours, and served as a gliding instructor with the Air Training Corps between 1943 and 1948. In 1951 he received the Royal Air Club Silver Medal for his record of active flying. He visited Australia for the first time in 45 years in 1961 and was photographed sitting in the cockpit of the same De Peducin by then an exhibit at the RAAF Museum that he had flown at Point Cook in 1914. Having retired from his legal practice in 1958, Petre died in London in 1962. In a retrospective of the RAAF in November 1939, Flight magazine described Henry Petre and Eric Harrison as the fathers of military aviation in Australia. Harrison was a member of the Court of Inquiry into the 1938 crash of the DC-2 Koima, and then Director of Aeronautical Inspection in World War II, before dying suddenly in 1945. Despite overseeing the training of every World War I Australian Flying Corps pilot, Harrison received no decorations or recognition, unlike much decorated Petre. He was regarded, though, as father of the RAAF until Air Marshal Richard Williams assumed that mantle. I think both Harrison and Petre are equally entitled to such an accolade. Thank you.